On a cold January night in 2005, stable owner Deborah Kay's body was found inside her trailer, and suspicion quickly fell on her 16-year-old ranch hand, Jose Fernando Bustos Diaz. He was born on December 7, 1988. By the time he was a teenager, his choices led to a tragedy that left a family without a mother and a community with unanswered questions. Official records describe him as a Hispanic male, about 5 feet 8 inches tall. His weight was reported between 160 and 195 pounds in different documents. He had noticeable acne scars and tattoos. These included a heart with a cross on his left hand and the names Vanessa and Lizeth on his wrists. Those small, permanent marks later helped in identifying him. Law enforcement described him as dangerous. The U.S. Marshals placed him on a high priority list and offered a reward for information that could lead to his capture. The turning point in his life happened on January 30, 2005. At that time, Bustos Diaz was 16 years old. He worked as a ranch hand at the Oaks of Kendallwood Stables in northwest Harris County. He lived in a small trailer on the property and was employed by the stable owner, Deborah Gail Kay, a woman in her 50s. On that winter night, Kay did not make it through. Her body was found inside her trailer at the stables. Reports say she had been harmed multiple times, including serious wounds to her throat. Investigators quickly focused on people close to her, and attention soon fell on the teenage worker. As the investigation continued, pieces started to fit together. Witnesses mentioned an argument around the time she passed. Soon, Bustos Diaz became the main suspect. County reports state that he confessed during questioning. Forensic evidence also connected him to the scene. The argument details vary depending on the account. But one fact remained consistent. The event was not random. It happened inside Kay's home, where there were no signs of forced entry. This suggested it was someone she knew, trusted, or who lived nearby. Why would a 16-year-old turn against his employer? Some reports say the argument began at the stables. Bustos Diaz later admitted he had been hungover that day and clashed with Kay when she refused to let him take the day off. That admission offered a motive: frustration, impaired judgment, and a sudden outburst toward the person in charge of him. He was charged and processed in Houston area courts. Because he was 16, the case raised questions about how serious cases involving minors are handled. Harris County prosecutors decided to try him as an adult. In 2006, Bustos Diaz pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 35 years. This was meant to reflect the seriousness of the act, even though he was only a teenager when he entered prison. His guilty plea avoided a jury trial and sent him directly into the state prison system. Prison was supposed to be the end of the story, but almost 5 years later, the case took another turn. On April 6, 2010, Bustos Diaz was working in the furniture factory at the Dolph Briscoe unit in Dilley. Along with another inmate, Octavio Ramos Lopez, he managed to slip away. Officials say the two men crawled through ventilation ducts and cut through a fence lined with razor wire. This escape required planning, tools, and precise timing during the early morning hours. Once news spread, a large search began across Texas and into federal agencies. Authorities suspected that the pair had outside help. Ramos Lopez was eventually caught in Reynosa, Mexico, but Bustos Diaz disappeared. From that moment, he was no longer just a convicted inmate. He became a fugitive. How did he manage to disappear from a secure facility? The method showed knowledge of the prison layout. Work assignments in certain units gave inmates access to less controlled areas. From the furniture factory, they reached ducts, then made it through the fence. Once outside, investigators believe a vehicle was waiting. Family or friends may have helped guide him across the border. Ramos Lopez was located in Reynosa, but Bustos Diaz remained missing. The U.S. Marshals later listed him as wanted for escape and unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. They warned he should be considered dangerous and offered increasing rewards for tips that could lead to his capture. Despite searches, rewards, and cooperation between agencies, Jose Bustos Diaz stayed at large for years. He was added to Texas' Most Wanted lists and later to the U.S. Marshals' 15 Most Wanted list. His tattoos and physical details were repeatedly shared in public bulletins. Authorities believe he has family ties in Houston and Brenham, and that he may be supported by relatives in Mexico, which has made tracking him more difficult. The questions remain. Was what happened at the stables a tragic outburst that escalated too far, or was it part of something deeper? Reports point to an argument, a confession, and forensic evidence. The legal process was clear: a guilty plea, adult sentencing, and 35 years in prison. Yet the story did not end in prison walls. The escape and years on the run turned it into something much larger. A case that started with a teenage worker at a horse stable grew into one of the U.S. Marshals' most pressing manhunts. The next case centers on someone much younger, just 16 years old when it began, and yet his story grew into one of the U.S. Marshals' most pressing manhunts. The name Deshaun Thoroughbred Davis first spread through whispers. Soon, it hit the headlines with shocking clarity. For years, he had been on the radar of Canadian investigators. By the year 2023, that attention turned into something much more serious. Davis was now linked to 2 separate cases, and not just in one country, but across 2 continents. The first case traces back to a cold January night in 2022 in Ontario. Authorities say a young woman named Elnaz Hajdamiri was taken from a relative's home in Wasaga Beach. Men dressed as officers convinced her to leave the house, then forced her into an SUV. Later, Davis was officially charged in that case, along with 2 others. Since Hajdamiri was never found, authorities eventually declared her presumed no longer alive. The second case happened on May 7, 2023, inside the Gala nightclub in Miami Beach. An armed man fired shots during a party. A musician named Lowell "Low" Grissom lost his life, and 2 women were seriously hurt. Investigators later linked Davis to that nightclub shooting. From that moment, U.S. Marshals and other agencies placed him on their radar. What started as 2 separate cases turned into an international manhunt. Davis was not an unknown figure. Official records describe him as a tall black man with tattoos across his neck, forearms, and chest. He went by the street name Thoroughbred. Law enforcement linked him to organized networks and individuals with ongoing disputes. In Ontario, authorities stressed that Hajdamiri's disappearance was not random. They say her former boyfriend arranged the plan, bringing in accomplices who used fake uniforms and forced to take her. In Florida, investigators called the nightclub incident a targeted shooting connected to group rivalry. Put together, these 2 threads, a disappearance tied to a personal relationship and a nightclub shooting tied to group activity, pushed the case to an international level. People wondered how one man could be connected to 2 such extreme events. Investigators had a short answer. Davis was already a fugitive in Canada when the Miami incident happened. That meant he had a reason to keep moving and to stay hidden. His possible motives ranged from loyalty to money, reputation, and even survival. The public record shows that in the Hajdamiri case, her ex-boyfriend allegedly set everything in motion, while Davis and another person carried it out by pretending to be police officers. In Miami, investigators believe the nightclub shooting was planned and targeted, not a random outburst. To them, it showed a pattern of deliberate harm rather than accidents. The timeline helps explain the pursuit. In Ontario, Davis was officially charged along with 2 others. Hajdamiri's case moved forward with her legally declared as presumed gone. In early 2024, Canadian and American authorities began coordinating efforts. By the spring and summer of that year, the U.S. Marshals added Davis to their wanted lists. They shared his photos and offered rewards for tips. The hunt had officially gone public. The capture came in early August 2024. On August 5th, U.S. Marshals found Davis in Redway, California. That is a small forested town in Northern California. The arrest came after tips and work from several task forces. For someone who had been wanted in 2 countries, his capture in a quiet, remote town felt sudden. He had spent months on the run, even making it onto Canada's 25 Most Wanted list, and later the Marshals' 15 Most Wanted. His arrest brought relief to families and marked the start of the courtroom process. Once in custody, Davis's case became more complicated. Both Canada and the U.S. wanted him. Extradition had to be sorted, and each country prepared its own charges. In October 2024, records showed Davis booked into Miami-Dade jail. There, he faced charges related to the nightclub shooting. At the same time, Canadian authorities kept their active charges tied to Haj Tamiri's disappearance. This meant Davis could eventually face trials in 2 countries. It is important to note that arrest does not mean conviction. Prosecutors in both countries had to examine evidence, interview witnesses, and prepare legal strategies before anything could reach a jury. So far, the records show this. In Florida, Davis was charged in connection with the nightclub case involving Lowell Grissom. He was booked into Miami-Dade custody after extradition. In Canada, Haj Tamiri's ex-boyfriend also faced charges, while pretrial work continued for other suspects. But there has been no final trial or sentence for Davis reported yet. There were no public records of him making final statements in court or receiving final decisions. Those steps had not yet happened because the trials were still ongoing. The families of those affected responded in different ways. In Miami, Lowell Grissom's mother thanked investigators and said she trusted the justice system to do its work. In Ontario, Haj Tamiri's family and friends kept pressing for answers. Canadian authorities still maintained a reward of $100,000 for any information about her whereabouts. The next case shows what happens when the suspect disappears across an ocean before the courtroom doors even open. Anthony Seth Burroughs was born in 1979. On paper, his life seemed ordinary. But over time, he became the focus of a serious case that has followed him for decades. Public records and the U.S. Marshals Wanted Notice list his birth date and several tattoos. Across his chest, the word Adriana. Across his back, Burroughs. On one arm, the word hate. On the other, love. These details gave investigators and the public clear ways to recognize him, even years later. Those same records describe him as 5 feet 9 inches tall and weighing around 200 pounds at the time investigators last had solid information about him. The events that put Burroughs on the run began on the night of April 29, 2000. A house gathering was being held on Tucson's west side. An argument broke out. That argument escalated, and gunfire followed. A 19-year-old named Ruben Rodriguez, who had been at the party, lost his life. Investigators quickly named Burroughs as the main person responsible for the shooting. He was officially charged with first-degree unlawful taking of life. But the case never reached a full trial. Within about 24 hours, authorities believe Burroughs left the country. From that point, the case split in 2 directions. On one side, the grieving family and local prosecutors worked to piece together a case. On the other side, law enforcement began chasing a man they feared had already crossed international borders. Why did he leave so quickly? Investigators pointed to 2 reasons: opportunity and fear. Within hours, Burroughs was gone from Tucson. Leads later suggested he had traveled to the Philippines, a country where he had family connections. Authorities believed he might have been working there as a tattoo artist. Leaving the country so fast often signals someone intends to avoid facing charges. In this case, it made an immediate arrest impossible. It also opened years of painful uncertainty for Ruben Rodriguez's loved ones. From the legal side, the charge against Burroughs was first-degree unlawful taking of life. That charge suggests deliberate planning or intent. Tucson police built their case using witness accounts, physical evidence from the scene, and the fact that Burroughs was identified as the man who left the gathering and then could not be found. But with him gone within a day, prosecutors never got the chance to hold a normal trial. There was no courtroom testimony, no verdict from a judge, no sentence announced. The case instead shifted into a long-term manhunt. For the Rodriguez family, the absence of a trial left deep pain. Media coverage years later described a mother and daughter still asking for answers. They often spoke publicly about the emptiness left behind and urged anyone with information to come forward. Those appeals kept the case in public memory. They also helped federal officials give the case more attention. The U.S. Marshals added Burroughs to their most wanted list. He was labeled as armed and dangerous. They offered a reward of $25,000 for information leading to his capture. That level of federal involvement changed the scale of the search. Burrows was no longer only a local suspect. He was now a fugitive the marshals were actively pursuing worldwide. How did investigators search from so far away? They checked immigration and travel records. They followed tips about possible family or work ties in the Philippines. They shared wanted posters and photos across law enforcement networks. The marshals also worked to spread his name and image publicly. They hoped someone somewhere would recognize him. Media stories and family appeals added social pressure, keeping the case visible overseas. But as time passed, the trail cooled. Witness memory faded. Leads went quiet. Records of people moving across borders were not always complete. Even with a clear suspect and what investigators believed to be a strong motive, the problem remained. The person they wanted was no longer within U.S. reach. That is why reports again and again note that Burrows fled the country and was thought to be in the Philippines. Law enforcement classified him as armed and dangerous. That label shaped how officers, citizens, and international partners were expected to respond. The marshals listed his tattoos and physical details carefully, giving the public specific markers to look for. The reward and posters were designed to make it harder for him to disappear fully. Over time, Burrows' name resurfaced whenever the marshals shared updated most wanted lists. Reports repeated the same points: the date of the shooting, the victim's name, the belief that Burrows fled overseas, his tattoos, and the fact he was considered armed and dangerous. These reports also highlighted the human side: a family still waiting for answers, officers keeping the file active decades later, and a case that still waits for its next chapter, whether that will be an arrest, a trial, or a confession. The next case is different. It begins with a missing person call and ends with one of the most disturbing discoveries along a highway. She was known in Melvindale and nearby towns simply as Tammy. People remembered her smiling face in photos, and at work she was the one who performed lab draws in clinics. But in the fall of 2018, her name became linked to a shocking case. Her full name is Tamara Renee Williams. She was born on March 18, 1979. Federal records list her height as 5 feet 5 inches. She has brown eyes and a tattoo on her upper left arm. She once worked as a trained phlebotomist, and investigators say she has used different names in the past. At the center of this story is a man named David Carter. He was 39 years old. He was a father, and those close to him said he cared deeply about his son and his family. In late September 2018, Carter went missing from his home in Melvindale. Days later, highway workers in Ohio made a disturbing discovery. Along Interstate 75, they found separate bags. Inside were human remains. Tests later confirmed they belonged to David Carter. The body had been cut apart and placed in containers, then left by the roadside. What began as a missing person case was now treated as a serious investigation. Investigators quickly turned their attention to Williams. She had been in a relationship with Carter for several months. Police detained her early in the investigation and questioned her. For a short time, she was in custody, but she was released because officials said they did not yet have enough evidence. By mid-October 2018, she had left the area. Authorities could no longer locate her. On December 20th of that year, a warrant was issued. It charged her with first-degree unlawful taking of a life, handling of remains, tampering with evidence, and a firearms offense. From then on, the case shifted from a local investigation to a national manhunt. So, what do these charges mean in simple terms? The first-degree charge suggests investigators believe the act was planned, not an accident. The handling of remains charge means the body was cut and moved after demise. Tampering with evidence refers to moving, hiding, or getting rid of key items. The firearms charge shows a gun was allegedly used. Taken together, prosecutors allege that Williams used a gun on Carter, then cut his body into pieces, and left them along Interstate 75. Those details appear in official warrants and federal notices. The timeline of events is short but clear. Late September 2018, Carter was last seen alive. In early October, family and friends reported him missing. On October 10th and October 16th, bags and a suitcase were found near Hancock, Ohio, containing Carter's remains and other evidence. Soon after, Williams was detained and then released. After that, she disappeared. Over time, detectives combined forensic work, witness statements, and digital records. Eventually, they presented enough to a judge to issue the felony warrant. Because Williams was not in custody when the warrant was signed, the case never went to trial. Instead, it moved into a search for her arrest. Why would someone leave instead of facing charges? A warrant means arrest, detention, and the risk of a long sentence if convicted. The charges against Williams were extremely serious, so investigators believe she chose to run. They say she left Michigan in mid-October 2018 and has not been found since. They also believe she may have used different names and could have sought work in healthcare given her training. In 2023, the search became more public. The U.S. Marshals Service added Williams to its 15 most wanted list. They announced a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to her arrest. This was a clear sign that investigators wanted national attention and broader public help. The official notice repeated the main allegations. Williams was described as having used a gun on her boyfriend, cutting up his body, and leaving the remains along Interstate 75. The federal notice included her photos, physical description, and known aliases, urging the public to report any sighting. The next case shows that even with clear evidence, capture is never guaranteed. And if you find stories like these important, consider subscribing. Lethal White's name has stayed on the minds of Baton Rouge investigators ever since the night of January 9, 2016. Official records list him as Lethal White, born in 1977. The U.S. Marshals photographed him and noted his tattoos, height, and weight. Notices describe him as 5 feet 10 inches tall, about 215 pounds, a black male with tattoos on both arms, chest, and back. That kind of description is meant to be plain, but behind it lies why he is on the Marshals' radar. He is wanted for an incident where a woman lost her life and another was badly injured in a close-range shooting. There is not much public information about his childhood or family. Police reports and federal posters focus on the event and his physical description, not on his background. The records become detailed when describing what prosecutors say happened inside an apartment in the Gardere neighborhood. According to statements, 2 women drove White to an apartment on Burbank Avenue. They expected an illegal substance pickup. White went inside, but instead of returning with the product, he came back with a gun. In a matter of seconds, what was supposed to be an exchange escalated. Courtney Thomas, a 28-year-old woman, was struck and did not survive. The second woman was wounded, but lived. Investigators quickly marked this case as the first homicide of the year in East Baton Rouge Parish and issued a warrant for White. The details of those few seconds come from police summaries and witness accounts. Why would he bring a firearm to what was supposed to be a product pickup? Some reports suggest the deal went wrong. Others point to suspicion and mistrust in the substance trade. Police also looked at possible ties between White and a local group called Big Money Block Boys. If his motive was fear of being cheated, revenge, or even trying to take from others, those are the kinds of explanations police often raise in such cases. But motives are rarely simple. They often mix money, anger, status, and survival. What police say happened that night was clear. White returned with a firearm and shot at close range. One woman lost her life, the other was left injured, and the scene was filled with sudden fear. Afterward, the case became a search that stretched from paperwork to the streets. The East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office opened the investigation. They gathered evidence, took statements, and quickly identified White as the suspect. Warrants were issued for first-degree charges, attempted charges, and illegal use of a firearm. Instead of surrendering, White disappeared. Over the years, investigators chased leads, checked shelters, contacted friends and relatives, and followed tips that often turned out false. Some leads suggested he might be in other states. At one point, the U.S. Marshals believed he could be in Atlanta, Georgia, or still in Baton Rouge. One reason fugitive cases are difficult is that people who know something often stay silent. And someone skilled at disappearing can stay hidden for a very long time. By December 2023, federal authorities placed White on the U.S. Marshals Service 15 Most Wanted list. That brought more attention and more resources. A reward of up to $25,000 was offered for information leading to his capture. announcement was meant to push someone with knowledge to step forward. It also showed that investigators were not giving up even years later. His addition to that list renewed public alerts, with the marshals sharing images, tattoo details, and warnings that he should be considered dangerous. It also sent a message to anyone helping him hide. The task force would not stop searching. What about court? That is the difficult part. Because White is still at large, there has been no trial. There is no transcript, no judge's decision, no ruling on guilt or innocence. The charges remain active. In the American system, a warrant is only the beginning. Until someone is arrested, tried, and either found guilty or cleared, the case cannot move forward. Louisiana does not hold full trials without the accused present. So for now, the legal process is paused. The family, prosecutors, and community must wait until the day he is brought to court. Investigators have used many tools to try to find White. They released posters, set up tip lines, offered rewards, and worked with other agencies. They used social media and local news to keep the case alive. They reached out to anyone who might have seen him or might be protecting him. But most of the time, the trail has gone cold. Some fugitive cases end when someone recognizes a face in a crowd. Others end during a traffic stop or with a piece of technology like a cell phone signal. Sometimes the break comes years later, when someone finally decides to share what they know. The marshal's alert that he may be in Atlanta or Baton Rouge serves two purposes. It directs attention to likely locations, and it reminds people that even after years, a wanted person could still be hiding in plain sight. One question haunts the next case. Why was the suspect released so quickly? That decision gave him just enough time to leave the U.S. and disappear. Olalekan Abimbola Olawusi is wanted by law enforcement in Rhode Island and also by the U.S. Marshals. He was born on July 15, 1976. Before the case began, he lived in Providence. His name now appears on the U.S. Marshal Service wanted list. The listing shows his aliases, physical details, date of birth, and the charges against him. Authorities are also offering a $25,000 reward for information that could lead to his capture. On April 3, 2017, emergency crews in Providence responded to a call about a 3-month-old baby in very serious condition. The baby was found inside a home, injured at the mouth and nose. Medical teams rushed the child, later identified as Toby Olawusi, to Hasbro Children's Hospital. Doctors said the child was in cardiac arrest and had to be revived. Once stabilized, doctors noticed something alarming. They found 18 different injuries, and many of them were at different stages of healing. The list included a skull fracture, internal injuries around the brain, serious brain damage, and broken ribs, collarbone, arms, and legs. These findings suggested the harm was not from one single accident. Instead, it looked like the child had faced repeated mistreatment over time. Because of these medical reports, Providence police arrested Olawusi on April 20, 2017. At first, he was charged with severe child mistreatment. The baby's condition did not improve. 6 months after being admitted to the hospital, the child passed away. After that, prosecutors raised the charges on October 31, 2017, saying the injuries eventually led to the child's loss of life. The case was moving toward trial, but it never reached the courtroom. Olalekan Olawusi was released on the same day he was first arrested in April 2017. Just 2 months later, investigators discovered that he had left the United States. Records show that he passed through John F. Kennedy International Airport on June 20, 2017, using a Nigerian passport. After that, he disappeared. Because of this, local prosecutors requested the help of the U.S. Marshals. This is how the case turned into an international search. What began as an ambulance call for a baby in crisis became a wide-reaching manhunt. Investigators believe Olawusi may have had help from relatives in Nigeria. That possibility is part of the reason he was placed on the U.S. Marshals Service's 15 Most Wanted list. This listing increases public awareness and expands the chances of someone reporting his whereabouts. The medical evidence remains central to the case. Injuries at different stages of healing suggested the child was harmed more than once. Multiple fractures in such a young baby, along with brain trauma and bite marks, raised strong concerns for doctors and police. Specialists in child medicine often use these details to determine if mistreatment has taken place. Prosecutors believed this showed a clear pattern over time. But since Olawusi fled before trial, many details, like witness testimony or his defense, were never heard in court. The baby's mother, Arinola Olawusi, was also charged in relation to the case. She faced accusations of cruelty and neglect. Court records later showed that she also left the country. Both parents leaving made the case more complicated. Their family ties raised questions about where Olawusi might have gone and who might be helping him. It also forced investigators to seek international cooperation, since a trial could not move forward without him being present. A question many people asked was why Olawusi was released so quickly after his arrest. In many cases, defendants can be released on bail while prosecutors prepare formal charges. Reports suggest that may have been the situation here. Whether it was routine practice, incomplete evidence at the time, or some other reason has not been fully explained to the public. But what is clear is that this release gave Olawusi the chance to leave the country. From that moment, the case shifted from a local process to an international fugitive investigation. The next individual lived in the same house as his girlfriend. By the time police returned that morning, she and her niece were gone, and so was he. He lived in a house with two women who trusted him. On a morning in March of 2019, that trust was broken. Neighbors later recalled sirens and quiet whispers. Investigators pieced together a short, frantic timeline that ended with two people losing their lives and a boyfriend disappearing. The official record lists his name and date of birth, February 3, 1974. It connects him to a double case in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Inside the home, his girlfriend, Shirletta Baberbay, and her 25-year-old niece, Kiona Griffin, were found shot multiple times. The U.S. Marshals Service named him as the main suspect. They added him to their list of 15 most wanted fugitives and offered a reward for information that could lead to his capture. On March 13, 2019, a 911 call began the chain of events. A caller whispered on the phone that someone was trying to harm her. Dispatchers sent officers to the address. Police arrived but left after seeing nothing clearly suspicious. It was only after a second call and a return to the house more than 2 hours later that the full situation came to light. Officers then found Shirletta and Kiona inside the home on Sheldon Avenue. Both women had lost their lives from multiple gunshot wounds. Investigators found a pistol at the scene. The weapon had been stolen in an earlier case, and it tied this situation to a larger trail of evidence. People close to Shirletta described her as private and caring, someone who kept to herself. He had been living with her and was in a relationship with her. Yet soon after, police began to focus on him as the main suspect. The stolen firearm became the key piece of evidence. Outside the house, he was nowhere to be found. Within days, authorities publicly named him as the prime suspect. What about motive? That question was asked by both families and investigators. Reports mentioned his history with past domestic disputes. Police records and local reports referred to earlier incidents involving him and women he was close to. But a clear, legally proven reason, such as financial gain or a planned grudge, was never confirmed. Since he was never caught or put on trial, no jury officially weighed the evidence. Families and investigators suggested that personal tensions and disputes may have escalated. Still, the motive has not been legally confirmed in court. Public filings listed the charges against him. They included possession of a stolen firearm and 2 counts of homicide. The weapon at the scene had been stolen nearly 2 years earlier, and evidence linked it to the shootings. Authorities warned the public that he was considered armed and dangerous. The marshals believed he might have been receiving help to stay hidden. They offered a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to his arrest. For the families, the most painful fact was how quickly he vanished. Law enforcement believes he left Michigan immediately after the incident. Tips and sightings pointed to other states where he might have had contacts. Reports placed him in cities ranging from Atlanta to parts of Ohio. Officials also said he had used multiple false names in the past, such as J.J. Robinson, Michael Richardson, and Marcus Wright. That made him harder to track. Despite the reward and many leads, he remained on the run for years. Why keep moving instead of turning himself in? Investigators publicly stated that he likely had help. They believed friends or relatives may have been assisting him. By using aliases and moving from place to place, he avoided being recognized. Unless someone close to him came forward, the chance of capture remained slim. The reward was meant to encourage exactly that, to convince someone in his circle to speak out. Detectives used surveillance, witness interviews, evidence from the house, and the recovered firearm to build their case. But without him in custody, the legal process could not move forward. No trial was ever held. That means no jury has reviewed the evidence. There are no records of a conviction, sentencing, or outcome. The justice process was left unfinished while he stayed on the run. The families of Charlotta and Kiona were left waiting. Community members held vigils and posted reminders online to keep the story alive. Podcasts and news reports retold the 911 call, the timeline, and the same facts again and again. They hoped the repeated coverage would keep pressure on investigators and keep the public alert. So how did evidence point to him so strongly? The stolen gun, his presence in the home, and past disputes all came together. These clues made him the clear suspect. But without an arrest, the case could not be tested in court. Federal notices described him repeatedly, listing his aliases, physical description, and the reward. Over the years, reports mentioned possible sightings in several states. In Dayton, police even checked into a tip about him. Other reports suggested he could be with family in Wisconsin, Arizona, Georgia, or Ohio. Each time, the marshals warned the public not to approach him. They stressed that he was dangerous and that any tips should go directly to law enforcement. This next case shows why some victims take years to come forward, and when one finally did, the suspect slipped away before justice could catch up. David Allen Bonas is the man prosecutors say began a long pattern of wrongdoing against a young girl, which she only felt safe enough to speak about years later. He was born on February 24, 1968. By the time his case reached law enforcement records, he had already become the subject of an arrest warrant, a U.S. Marshal's Most Wanted poster, and a reward of $25,000. Official records show that he also used other names. They describe him as about 5 feet 9 inches tall, with brown hair and green eyes. The U.S. Marshals say he faces charges of harming a child and fleeing to avoid facing prosecution. They also warn that he should be considered dangerous. The story that led to this warrant began in late 2008. A 17-year-old girl told her mother that the mistreatment had started when she was 12. This disclosure began a full investigation. Authorities questioned Bonas and collected a DNA sample. The questioning stopped before it was finished, and Bonas was allowed to leave. The next day, when investigators obtained a search warrant, Bonas had already left the area. From that point forward, the case shifted. It went from a local investigation into a wide-ranging search that stretched across different states and continued for years. So what exactly were the allegations? The victim said the mistreatment was repeated and continued for years. She told investigators that it began when she was 12 and carried on throughout her teenage years. Authorities viewed this as long-term mistreatment and collected DNA samples along with witness statements. Local and later national media documented her account, noting the duration of the harm and the power imbalance inside the home. This account became the backbone of the prosecution's case. It described repeated inappropriate contact with a minor over several years, backed up by police reports and interviews. Why did this matter stay unresolved in court? The answer is because Bonas left before the trial could begin. Once a suspect cannot be located, the trial cannot move forward. The charges stay active. The warrant remains open. The evidence remains in files. Prosecutors said they had enough reason to press charges, but the trial never happened because he left right after being identified by the victim and after police moved in with a search warrant. The U.S. Marshals now also list him for fleeing to avoid prosecution in addition to the child-related charge. Why would someone accused of such serious wrongdoing leave instead of facing court? There are no public statements from Bonas explaining his decision. What is known is that he left right after the search warrant was issued. From interviews with the victim, fear and control appeared to play a large role in why she waited years to speak. When the accused person is a family member or someone inside the home, it can make it much harder for victims to come forward. Law enforcement and reporters have said Bonas may have relied on personal ties and mobility to hide. Some reports speculated he could be in areas where he had connections, including parts of Wyoming and Nebraska. Investigators and media also described his role inside the household. The victim said he acted as a caretaker figure, which gave him access and trust. Prosecutors often argue that when someone in a caregiving role misuses that trust, it makes the victim more vulnerable. This description fits the public record: repeated offenses inside a family setting, a young victim who stayed silent for years because of fear, and allegations that the suspect manipulated the household. These are the points prosecutors would use to prove a pattern if the case ever reached trial. How strong was the case when charges were filed? Police had DNA evidence and a clear victim statement describing repeated harm. These items are the type of evidence that normally supports prosecution, especially when the victim identifies the accused person and physical evidence matches. The U.S. Marshal's poster outlines the investigative timeline. The victim's statement was given on December 22, 2008. Police interviewed Bonas and collected DNA. He then disappeared after a warrant was requested. The poster and later press releases show investigators believed they had enough for trial. The missing part was custody. Without having the suspect in custody, the case could not move forward in court. Once Bonas disappeared, the search for him became the main priority. Federal, state, and local agencies joined the U.S. Marshals to put the case on a national level. He was placed on fugitive lists, featured on national programs, and a reward was offered for tips. Authorities also warned that he might be armed and could be using false names. These cautions explain why investigators treat each tip carefully, and why they also monitor international records like passports and border crossings. Now, what if the man sitting across from you in a business meeting was also planning your end? John Penaligan's life looked like two completely different stories. On one side, he was a businessman connected to home health care. On the other, he was a fugitive whose name would later appear on the U.S. Marshal's most wanted list. In December of 2016, investigators began piecing together how a routine legal meeting inside a quiet Northbrook office park ended with tragedy. The victim was Victor Jagar Patel, a 36-year-old real estate attorney. He handled ordinary cases for clients, but in this situation, his work put him directly against Penaligan's business interests. According to investigators, Penaligan used a fake name and wore a disguise to lure Patel into the meeting. Patel was later found in his office on December 7th, the cause being strangulation. From the very beginning, police believed this was carefully planned. Surveillance footage and later interviews supported that view. At the time, Penaligan ran a home health care company called Vital Wellness Home Health, Inc. He was facing a civil lawsuit brought by clients Patel represented. Investigators said Penaligan had a clear motive. Patel stood between him and legal cases that could damage his company and threaten his freedom. Authorities believed he booked the appointment under an alias, showed up in disguise, and carried out the act inside the office. The sequence of steps, the lure, the disguise, and then the attack, convinced investigators this was no accident, but a targeted act against someone tied to a lawsuit. How did Penaligan manage to stay hidden for years? Investigators believed the answer was in his dual citizenship and ability to travel. Penaligan was born in the Philippines and held passports from both the Philippines and the United States. That gave him the option to leave the country and avoid arrest. In the weeks after Patel lost his life, Penaligan was briefly held at the Canadian border for an unrelated firearms matter. He was also interviewed by Northbrook police. Soon after, searches were carried out at his property. In February of 2017, an arrest warrant was issued for first-degree charges. Instead of facing court, Penaligan left U.S. jurisdiction and vanished. Rumors later placed him in the Philippines in 2017. Federal investigators chased leads across borders and widened their search. What started as a local case in Northbrook grew into an international pursuit. In November of 2020, with the case stalled, Northbrook Police and the U.S. Marshals Service added Panaligan to the agency's 15 most wanted list. That decision gave the case national attention and offered a reward for tips. But it also meant Panaligan had years to erase his trail. For Patel's family, every update was painful. Each press release, each reminder of Panaligan's name on the fugitives list, brought back the grief. The question remained, would he ever be caught? Nearly 8 years later, in October of 2024, that answer finally came. Why did Panaligan think he could stay away for so long? Investigators explained that people who prepare to flee often plan every detail. They suspected he changed his habits, used false names, and traveled to countries where extradition takes time. His background in business travel made this even easier. But even the most careful person leaves clues. With international cooperation and constant leads, investigators narrowed down his location. On October 21, 2024, authorities in Tepic, Mexico arrested Panaligan. He was turned over to Mexican immigration officers and deported to the United States the very next day. At O'Hare Airport, Northbrook Police took him into custody. He was placed in Cook County Jail without bond while awaiting hearings. The arrest did not erase the heartbreak of the original case. Patel's family described him as more than a lawyer. He was a husband, a father, and a man who worked hard to support his children. Friends remembered him the same way. For investigators, the arrest brought closure after years of reviewing surveillance tapes, phone records, and witness accounts. Officials also pointed to the teamwork between local police and federal agencies. This case showed how something that began in one office could grow into a national priority once borders were crossed. After his return to the U.S., Panaligan faced the legal process waiting for him. The warrant for first-degree charges was still active, and he remained detained while court proceedings moved forward. Unlike stories that end quickly with a trial and verdict, this one stretched on. As of the most recent reports, Panaligan was back in county custody, but no final verdict or sentence had been announced. The next case started as a late-night argument. By morning, one woman was gone, her daughter barely alive, and the suspect had disappeared. Robert Lee King's life, at least in public records, is remembered for one violent night. He was born on August 26, 1964. By official accounts, he became the focus of one of the region's most urgent investigations after an early morning incident on December 1, 2005. Law enforcement described him as a tall man with tattoos on both arms. He had brown eyes and was later labeled by investigators as armed and dangerous. These details, his birth date, his physical description, and the federal wanted notice, came from the U.S. Marshals. They placed him on their list and even published a poster offering a reward for information. Police summaries describe what happened that night in Memphis. Around 4 a.m, neighbors heard an argument inside a home. King lived there with Dorothy Smith, the woman he shared the house with. Their argument grew more heated. Dorothy's daughter Diana, who was about 20 years old, woke up and went to her mother's room. She saw King standing over her mother. According to official reports and news coverage from that time, Dorothy was struck and cut. Diana tried to run but was chased. She was injured, suffering a deep wound to her neck. Dorothy did not survive her injuries. Diana survived and later identified King in a photo lineup. She told investigators he was the one responsible for hurting her and her mother. Her identification became a central piece of the case. After that night, the case changed from a local matter into a nationwide search. Authorities had enough evidence to file charges against King. Instead of facing the court process, he left the area. When someone disappears after serious charges are filed, it makes the case harder. Evidence can be lost. Witnesses can move away. Memories can fade. The U.S. Marshals stepped in. They said King fled to avoid prosecution. They placed him on their 15 most wanted list and offered a reward for tips leading to his capture. That status is only given in the most serious cases. It meant investigators believed King was actively avoiding arrest. Why did it happen? What pushed that night from an argument into such a tragic outcome? Public records do not give a clear answer. Court documents and news coverage focus on actions and outcomes. An argument, a violent scene, a daughter injured, a mother gone, and a man who ran. Some reports suggested long-term conflict in the home. They hinted that the events may have followed an ongoing dispute, but a clear motive, the kind proven in court, was never officially presented. No trial was held in Shelby County because King was never caught. Law enforcement documented the events, but not the deeper reason. Diana's role remained one of the strongest points in the case. She woke up that night. She tried to help her mother. She was injured herself. Later, she identified King in photos. That eyewitness statement was powerful. Investigators treated it as reliable enough to press charges and push the federal search forward. So how did the search unfold? Local police first investigated the home and people close to King and Dorothy. Once it became clear King had left the area, federal agents joined in. The U.S. Marshals released posters, press statements, and even created age-progressed images to show what he might look like years later. The poster described him as wanted since 2006. It listed the offense in direct language and attached a reward. This was meant to encourage the public to come forward with tips. Over the years, investigators received information pointing to other states. At one point, marshals searched locations in Mississippi where he was thought to be hiding. Despite these efforts and occasional bursts of media attention, King remained missing for years.